Tourette's Podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as?
A lot of people, maybe they do know someone with Tourette's, but I know most of the people I've talked to didn't until they met me.
This is Tourette's Podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hello, and thanks for being here. We're back with a new episode after a little holiday break and some time to catch up on personal things, including a move. I moved to a new town. Aspects of that are still in progress. Anyway, that's what I was doing. We're back, and I'm so happy because we've got a nice casual conversation with our guest, Sophie, covering a lot of ground on life with Tourette syndrome, what it means to have this thing you've got to negotiate with somehow along the way. We kick it off highlighting a project she's been working on, and that's examining perceptions on how Tourette is portrayed. No secret that that's been a sensitive topic. It's not often portrayed positively or empathetically. Although we have had some major exceptions in the news somewhat recently, I'll say, especially the pieces that fellow Touretteer David Begnaud has done with CBS News. I make sure to mention that in the conversation coming up, but hopefully you caught those news spots recently from David Begnaud. There's also a call here for more good Tourette portrayals to show to younger audiences, school children and teenagers, for instance. And actually, with that, I'll give a shout out to all the amazing authors putting out great Tourette or disability-focused material for those audiences. Shout out to Riani Patel, an author with Tourette who we've talked to on the podcast before and hope to hear from again with any future projects. Speaking of, I hear pretty frequently from people in the Tourette community about projects they're working on, and I always love that. Whether it's a school project you want to tell me about or something you've been doing at your office to spread awareness or something totally independent like an art project or something like that, please let me know what you're working on that has to do with Tourette. This is such a creative community, and there are so many cool things that people come up with as inspired by Tourette. Tourette's Podcast at gmail.com to share what you've been working on with me. I'd love to mention it on the podcast. Or you can go to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook and share there. A poem, a drawing, a video, a presentation, whatever it is. I'd love to see what Tourette inspired you to do. Got something to announce for our United States-based audience. As you know, this podcast is made possible by the Tourette Association of America with more than 50 years of progress and looking ahead to 2023. So if you're in the United States, mark this on your calendar. March 8th. It's the National Day of Advocacy. That's March 8th. And you can register with the Tourette Association of America for in-person advocacy in Washington, D.C., advocating on Capitol Hill for Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. This will be a well-organized thing. The Tourette Association's got you on how to effectively advocate. You can head to Tourette.org for information. Again, this is on March 8th, the National Day of Advocacy for Tourette and tic disorders. We talk about Tourette portrayals later on this episode with our guest, Sophie. And I mean, I'm pretty sure you're not going to say that you're totally content with how Tourette is regarded out there in the world. There's a lot more we can do in the public, in the world of policy. We'll talk more about this in future episodes, the National Day of Advocacy and the visit to Capitol Hill. But again, that's in March. So that'll be here before you know it. We're headed into late January already. So just keep it on the calendar, monitor the Tourette Association's social media for more information on how you can participate. You can also go to Tourette.org. That's the website. Again, that's for our U.S. audience. We have listeners spanning the globe, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here and for everything you do in the name of Tourette advocacy. Let's go ahead and get to our guest conversation this week.
So I'm Sophie Griffiths. I live in Frederick, Maryland, go to school at Juniata College in Huntington, Pennsylvania, and I'm currently a senior undergrad student in social work.
I guess full disclosure for anybody listening, this is not our first time talking. We haven't planned out this conversation in advance, but you and I did talk a little while back for something you were working on. Could you, do you want to go into that like really quick? We don't have to go too deep into it, but what are you working on with regard to Tourette syndrome?
I'm working on a thesis project surrounding how Tourette syndrome is portrayed in media, and more specifically recent media like 2000s to present. So I reached out and asked you if I could interview you for your personal I don't know, I guess, journey to talk about your experiences with Tourette's and media for the thesis writing.
It's a really interesting topic, and it's really impactful because, I remember when I was first diagnosed, when I was like 6 years old, I didn't know that Tourette, had a strange media portrayal. It wasn't until I was maybe 12 or 13 that I started to pick up on the fact that Tourette syndrome was something people were making fun of. This was like the early 90s for me. And then...
Yeah, I never really saw it portrayed much in media when I was a kid either.
Yeah. It's interesting kind of coming into that realization that, okay, so I'm finally seeing this on TV, yet it's somebody making fun of it. And what does that mean? Is this whole time have I been a joke? Or, it can be really rattling to hear a negative portrayal on something you're struggling with. Not everybody, I put struggle, kind of in tentative quotes, 'cause not everybody quote unquote struggles with it, but
yeah,
it's definitely a unique experience.
It's not all uphill though.
Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge that individual people have, and then seeing it on TV portrayed by people who don't have that challenge, kind of dunking on it is.
And everyone's experience is so unique. Like, it can't be portrayed in sort of a short sitcom joke form.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen many good Tourette portrayals in the mix of things? Honestly, I can say that
I'm pretty neutral because I haven't really seen either too many good ones or bad ones. I'm not honestly on media that much.
Yeah.
So I just don't tend to see many portrayals, period.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, when I see a Tourette portrayal, it's usually, it's either, one of those movies that I think we have a list of the movies that Tourette is portrayed in. I say list, kind of, softly, but it's that, or, it's a media examination. Maybe it's like a local youth who has Tourette syndrome, and this is what this youth goes through. Like, sometimes there's a local news segment about it, and it's, like those are usually pretty okay. But I have to say the best one I've seen in a while is the one that David Begnaud did with Craig Elgin, Tourette's Cop, on CBS News.
I know of it, but I haven't seen it.
It was good. It was so well done, and with such humanity, and it was very pragmatic too. It was definitely, getting the experts on to say, like, let's just get basic. What is Tourette syndrome? What could cause something like this? What do we know about it? And it's a really, I thought it was a really redeeming way of going about it, because it looked at it, A, for its humanity, B, there's science, and there are things that that there's treatments, and some of the treatment can be pretty dramatic, kind of, like the deep brain stimulation type stuff, and it's. I thought it was a very good portrayal.
That's interesting, because I definitely haven't seen media portrayals that talk about that part of it.
Yeah, it was a nice rare moment, and A.D. Smith, our friend, our good friend, friend of the podcast, A.D. Smith from the TV show The Three Drinkers. He's done some wonderful advocacy in the UK, but it's it feels like, in the past maybe a couple of years, there have been some good portrayals out there, some good lessons to learn, and at least some good things to point people toward if they're like, I don't have Tourette syndrome, I want to know about it, but, where do I go to learn more?
It's so hard to describe if you don't have it.
Yeah, it's very hard to describe if you don't have it. And it's good to have these, positive portrayals that, have done a decent job of making it something that, kind of the everyday person can understand. And it's nice to see more of that.
I'd like to see more of it in like children's media, like even just like children's books or something. Because I remember like one book that I think my parents had around the house when I was a kid that was just, it wasn't like a children's book, but it was a book about like my kid has Tourette's and like that sort of stuff. But I definitely haven't seen it portrayed in children's media in more of a visual format to explain what it is.
That's a good point. This makes me think of the parents who write in to the podcast saying, there's a Tourette support group in my area. there might be other kids, my child's age who also have Tourette. That could be great for them to make that connection. But could it also be inflammatory to their Tourette? Like if you put, people with Tourette together, tics start to fly and you could learn new tics. I say learn, but you could kind of pick up new tics.
I had never actually been around anyone else who had Tourette's until I was in college. That's the first time I met someone in person who had Tourette's. And that's when it clicked for me. And I realized that did happen for me. Like I tic way more when I'm seeing another person ticking, and I'll like mimic their tics and mirror what they're doing.
Yeah. And I feel like that is sometimes a consideration for parents when they're, like, how do we best manage our child's Tourette is it's really potent and it's very dynamic. Is it going to be worse if we interact with other people who have Tourette for that reason? And my advice is always, no, definitely, like create the connections, create the interactions,
definitely to each their own, but it's really good to be able to talk to other people about it.
It can be mind-blowingly important for someone to find something similar in somebody else that they, because, again, as we say on the podcast, Tourette is not a rare disorder, but it's a rare experience, when you're living with it. You don't know a lot of people with Tourette syndrome. And to finally connect with somebody who does have it, whether you're a child, an adult, it's always a really kind of profound experience. And there's a lot to be said.
Conversation, because I love talking to anyone about it. But when you're talking to someone else who has Tourette's, it doesn't start with an explanation.
Right. Yeah. Well, how do you explain Tourette? I mean, do you explain Tourette's to other people? Like, have people ask?
I do. Usually, it only comes up like if it's relevant. I don't tend to be like the first thing that people know about me.
Yeah.
Not that I mind, but I don't want that to be like people seeing me with Tourette's and then me instead of the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, as I think we've talked about on the podcast before, is judgment can really, if someone learns I have Tourette syndrome, the judgment of that can really outpace my ability to kind of show them what I really am versus what, say the stereotype is, or people have their preconceived notions of what something like Tourette syndrome is. And it can be really challenging to explain it to somebody to where they're going to get it on the first stroke,
Yeah. Usually to me, people are pretty surprised because I have a lot of tics, but most of them aren't very visible to the public eye. Like a lot of them are more stuff that I feel internally or expressed very minimally, like through motor tics.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes with like an explanation and then explaining what my tics are because people just don't see them.
What do people tend to say if there's a situation where you have disclosed that you have Tourette syndrome? I mean, is it basically that? Is it like initial disbelief or?
Usually it's not like disbelief, but I've gotten a lot of like, oh, I just didn't realize. Yeah. Like that sort of thing, which is fine. Like it's okay if people aren't staring at me and realizing I'm taking a punch.
Well, yeah, it's your business, it's up to you when you have that conversation with other people, when it's appropriate, when it's maybe practical. But I think we talked about this recently too, that Tourette is one of these unique things where it's so misunderstood that, like, yes, it's your business, it's your condition. You shouldn't be expected to disclose it to people any more than you should be able to, any more than you should be expected to disclose some other medical condition or something like that. But at the same time, it's so misunderstood that advocacy seems to, kind of demand that you do talk about it and you do have, something to say, and you can change somebody's perception about what Tourette syndrome is. I mean, have you been in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've been in quite that position, but I've definitely been able to, I don't know if educate is the right word, but explain more my experiences with Tourette's to other people who don't really know much about Tourette's.
Yeah.
And I know like some of those people have done like their own research after having a conversation with me, and then we've had deeper conversations about it, which I appreciate.
That's cool. I mean, has this been something that's come up with, friends or Can you remember some of the early conversations that you did have with people outside of your family about Tourette syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it a fair amount within my family, just sort of casually, but I know the first time, except for some very close friends in like lower L and below, I was diagnosed in kindergarten with Tourette's, so it's always been there. Like, I honestly don't remember my childhood very well, but like I don't remember ever having a conversation with my parents about like, you have Tourette's, this is what it is. But I remember the first time I ever told people publicly was when I was in 6th grade. I went to a Montessori school from kindergarten through 8th grade. So my 6th grade class had 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in it.
Okay.
And we had a final project where we could do the project on just anything we wanted. And I was like, I'm going to tell everyone in my class that I have Tourette's syndrome and explain what that is. Which was really interesting because kids have no filter. So I gave my spiel and explained what Tourette's was and my experiences and some of the tics that I had. And like at the time I had like a throat clearing tic and some other really common ones. And I just remember getting so many questions from other classmates of just like, one person asked like, did I curse? And I was like, no, you've never seen me do that before. Not going to start doing it now. A couple of kids asked if like itches that they've had on their nose, because I was trying to explain it and sort of like it feels like you're going to sneeze and you have to and you can't hold it back. Some kids were talking about like having an itch or like they were clearing their throat a lot the other day, and if they had Tourette's syndrome or tics.
I think I might have that too. Yeah.
I don't know. It was really interesting conversation. I think a lot of the younger kids didn't understand it quite to the full extent, which was fine. But I think it opened up a lot of conversations when I was younger.
So you were diagnosed. You mentioned that, you don't remember the early days of like the conversation with your parents about this is Tourette syndrome, this is what it is. But, was it something you were open about? Do you remember being young and having Tourette syndrome and talking with people about it, or did you kind of, keep it under your hat?
I wasn't open about it, but that wasn't because I was like ashamed or didn't want people to know that I had Tourette's. I was a very introverted kid, and Tourette's doesn't really let you be that. It doesn't let you be silent in a corner.
Yeah.
So I think I pushed off conversations sort of surrounding that aspect of it sometimes. I wasn't open about it. If people asked about it, I would have talked about it, but that's not the sort of things that people tend to bring up in conversation or ask about offhand.
Yeah.
So I was not like vocal about it before I was in like upper L high school.
So was that to say that you were you masking, or were you, making efforts to kind of cover it up? Or
I masked some of my more vocal tics. Yeah, I did a lot. And part of that, I think, was because I would see like, they did not mean it this way, but I would see how it would worry my parents sometimes. And I'd be like, oh, this is a thing I need to be conscious about. But I never talked to them about it. I just did it.
Yeah. So did you feel like you were, you mentioned, I mean, you just said, about your parents. I mean, did you see it as something that was maybe special or different about yourself? And did that impact different parts of your life, like ways that you conduct yourself, compose yourself? Because I still to this day kind of feel like my parents kind of worry about me and, kind of where I am with everything. And whether it's Tourette, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, I can still kind of read it on them. And that has maybe impacted how I compose myself around them so they don't worry. It's almost like I go like a little bit of an extra mile to communicate that I'm okay.
Yeah. Honestly, in the long run, I think it's made me a lot more open to having conversations, interactions with people. I think it's helped me in a lot of ways. Just socially speaking, I think it's easier for me to just jump into a conversation with someone about, like, if I talk about someone with having Tourette's, that we can talk about anything at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Do you do that often? Have you talked with other people who have Tourette syndrome? Because that's a cool experience of being able to talk about something and it's not even something you have to address at the beginning. Like, okay, look, if my eyes dart in different directions, it's not because I'm not paying attention. That's a tic. I have Tourette syndrome. It's such a labor, to kind of say
but
that.
I definitely
at
throw
the
it
outset.
out as my fun fact in introductions in college classes sometimes.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, but do you often or have you talked with other people who have Tourette syndrome besides? I mean, we talked recently, but how often does that happen?
Honestly, not much. I've had a couple of conversations with other people, but I'm not close to anyone who has Tourette syndrome, so I've never had that many conversations with other people who actually have it.
Have you attended any like groups or conferences or anything like that, or been in the same room?
No, I haven't. I've been to one of Samuel Comroe's comedy shows.
Oh, that's great.
I was in high school.
That's good. Did he make any? Did he have any? And for people listening, I mean, I'm sure most people know, but Samuel Comroe is a comedian who has Tourette syndrome, and he's I follow him on Instagram. He seems to be doing great, in terms of his career, and he has some Tourette material. Was he making any Tourette's jokes when you saw him?
He might have made a couple after like catcallers in the audience, but not really. No. Which is fine, honestly.
Yeah, that's a question people write into the podcast a lot, is about the Tourette joke and have you ever heard a funny Tourette joke? And my answer is kind of, if it comes from the outside, no, I've never heard a funny Tourette joke. But if it comes from somebody like Samuel, who, like that's his life, and comedy is clearly, his skill and his way of communicating and telling stories and relating to people. And that's completely legitimate in my eyes. Yeah. I mean, I think he's really funny.
I remember really connecting with his AGT audition when I saw that on TV.
Yeah.
I was just surprised because I'd never heard anyone else's experiences with it really before then.
Yeah, that was kind of a cool moment because his material, he was getting Tourette out of the way, I think, for the audience, but it was also his material. But, that communicated to a lot of people because it was a surprise. He wasn't somebody that the community, I think, knew of before AGT, America's Got Talent. And then he shows up and here's this comedian with Tourette syndrome. And he got really far. He went like all the way to the end, didn't he?
Honestly, it's been a while and I don't really remember, but that sounds about right.
Yeah. I think he was one of the finalists. I think
I really appreciated him coming in with the Tourette's and then also having a bunch of sets that didn't really involve it as much.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. Is like, it's up to him whether he wants to be the comedian with Tourette syndrome versus a comedian. Yeah. And by the way, he also has Tourette syndrome or whatever else. Which is really respectable because, I'm a photographer for a living. I'm very proud of the Tourette community, and I'm very proud to have Tourette syndrome, and I like recognizing the good that it's done to my life. But I don't want to be the photographer with Tourette syndrome. I want to be a photographer. Like I don't want the the bold asterisk. With
Happy to have it part of you, but not defining you.
Right, exactly. It's not the definition of me. And I know that something people say is, I have Tourette, but it doesn't have me. It kind of does have me sometimes, but it's still not ultimately, it informs a lot of my experience, but it's still not, it's still not me in the end. I still have an identity. And how do you find that Tourette impacts the direction that you've gone in life and maybe your interests, what you're looking at in school or wherever?
I think it helped me, maybe not in school, but it really helped me find like art in general as a really big outlet for myself. Like whether that was singing or photography, or I do mostly just like painting, drawing. I make earrings.
Awesome.
Also, that's, I guess it's a business more than a hobby, but But yeah, it's nice because at least for me, for the most part, if I'm working with jewelry or I'm painting, I don't tic that much.
How did you pick that up? Was it something that you've always been good at, or did you have a revelation one day where art was going to?
No, I picked up making earrings when I was about 11, just sort of self-taught. But I have like Basement Designs is my business name, and I've been selling. I used to sell them like out front of my house when my neighbors were having a garage sale next door.
Oh, that's awesome.
But now I sell them over Instagram. Really moved up.
That's cool. I mean, does that? I'm sure there's a therapeutic aspect of doing that.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. I appreciate it. And more recently, I've been working like painting into making earrings, and I've been working with ceramics, so I can actually make my own designs on earrings. So it's a fun amalgamation.
Do your tics impact your ability to create, or do they take a vacation or take a hike? As some people say, you know, when they kind of get in the zone, they hyper focus, they're doing something creative. What happens with you?
Most of the time when I'm hyper fixated on art stuff, I don't tic, but I've had a couple of tics that actually get worse when I'm focused on things.
Yeah.
Like I had one tic, it's kind of hard to explain, but it was a breathing one that's kind of come back recently again. I've had it since my junior year of high school, where I stop breathing and I expel like all the air in my lungs. And then I hold my breath for a few seconds before I can breathe again.
Same here.
Yeah. And that one actually got worse. And I ran cross country all through high school, and it took me out of being able to run cross country my senior year because it got really bad.
Oh my gosh. So I used to play soccer when I was young. I actually played for like 20 years. And that was a common challenge for me, was that specific tic where I would sort of take all the air out of me. I would exhale really, really hard. And as soon as I exhaled and got the last bit of breath out, I would do another exhale. Even if nothing came out, it was just like, just taking all the air out of me.
So forcing that motion sort of, yeah.
Yeah. And then I would stay that way. I would have to stay that way without inhaling any new air for like, you know, at least a matter of seconds. And then I would inhale again. It was really uncomfortable because I have asthma. And if I breathe a certain way, that really inflames me. And I noticed that does pick up when I do something athletic, like when I go on a walk or a run or something like that. I'm battling that specific tic.
Yeah. And it was the first tic that did that sort of opposite flip for me. So it was really surprising when I first got it. But yeah, it's one that was always like, it was really present because I always had to be really focused on it when I was doing that tic. So I couldn't focus on whatever was happening around me. So like on really bad tic days, like I would just focus on breathing, and like I would be lightheaded all the time. I've fallen over a couple times because of that tic.
Oh, wow.
Just in walking around because I was too lightheaded. But it's not one that's very visible because it just looks like I'm breathing weird.
Well, that's one that's like, you know, that can't be the first tic that you explain to somebody when it comes to explaining what Tourette is like in your life, because it's so different and it's so, you know, it like that's one that's kind of hard to relate to. If I say that my tics include like blinking and like, you know, like wrinkling my nose or something, that's kind of easy to talk about. But stuff as complex as that with, you know, a certain feeling in your lungs that you need to achieve or something like that's hard to relate to. And I think that's another reason why Tourette has kind of been a straggler in terms of, you know, public acceptance and understanding, because it's so different in terms of the experience and what a tic is like. And
definitely. And a lot of the really complex ones are the ones that are hard to explain.
Do you have a lot of complex tics?
I'd say most of like the tics that stick around from me are more complex, or the ones that are recurring. I had one where like I couldn't sometimes like look at any exposed skin, like any skin that wasn't covered by clothing. So when I was trying to do schoolwork, I'd have to prop my computer up in weird ways and like hold my arms behind my back and sometimes like stare at the ceiling because I could see my reflection on the screen and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's such a weird one to explain because I was like, I don't know. I just couldn't, like, I couldn't look at it.
Yeah, it's kind of inscrutable to the general public, I would imagine.
Yeah, my family only noticed when I would just like whip my head up to stare at the ceiling randomly.
Do you have a diversity of tics right now? You know, anything painful or, you know, like mine kind of range from very benign and very invisible and things I don't mind to things I very much mind and things that, are painful and may have long-term impacts on me.
I have a fair amount of ones that are actually painful and straining right now. I have one where most of the time right now, I'm like rapidly flexing my ab muscles to the point where it's hard to breathe sometimes. Like I'll do it until I'm out of breath.
I got
and
that
that's
too.
Sort of the same one that I've had since like junior high that's sort of formed into a bunch of different stuff over the years.
Yeah.
I have different shoulder rolling tics with each of my shoulders. I strain my neck. I have an eye blinking one right now, so I'll kind of flutter my eyes sometimes or squeeze them shut really hard.
Yeah.
Those are some of them.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support for those with Tourette syndrome or a tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the Tourette community. To learn more, go to tourette.org. That's TOURETTE.org. The Tourette Association of America. Uncontrollable, unstoppable. How would you evaluate your Tourette over time? Have things gotten worse in terms of tics? Have things, leveled off, or was it worse when you were younger? Kind of where are you with that?
I think since my junior year of high school, it's gotten worse. A lot of the tics that I have are more complex or more painful.
Really?
But yeah, I have more sort of intrusive tics than I had when I was in high school or younger.
So intrusive meaning things that, do you mean things you can't, obviously tics are things we can't control, but
yeah.
But what do you mean intrusive?
I just mean intrusive as like they're very distracting for me or they hurt more, sort of disrupting daily life.
Yeah, tics that are powerful enough to kind of knock you off your game for a minute.
Yeah.
Have you found any ways to kind of manage when you're having a challenging time, or do you take medications or meditation?
I've never
or
taken medication.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know that I have a good way of managing tics. I'll usually just try to distract myself with something, or I'll focus on not doing the one particular tic that's causing pain or being annoying.
So you can kind of put a set of eyes on a certain tic and try to manipulate it, or?
Yeah, if I'm focused on it, which obviously I can't do 24/7. But if I really need a break or I need to breathe or something, I can stop for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a skill that, requires a lot of time to learn, especially with tics, how the changing nature of tics, how maybe it's kind of frustrating because there are tics I've had where I have maybe quote unquote figured out how to master how to deal with that tic. And it's like, as soon as I get that down and I'm like, okay, this tic doesn't really bother me anymore. I can, mask it this way, or I can manipulate it to make it something else. As soon as I get that down, it's gone. I don't have the urge anymore. And I have a new tic. That's like a new challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always have a different one that pops up if I've really worked through one.
I know you said you don't remember the earliest days and conversations with your parents, but what was it like in terms of your parents and how they regarded your Tourette? I mean, was there anything like this elsewhere in the family? It can be kind of genetic in some cases, but how did your family regard it?
No one else in my family has Tourette's. I have ADD and Tourette's, and ADHD definitely runs in my family.
Yeah.
So I've had similar experiences with some of my family members surrounding that aspect. But Tourette's, I think my parents, and especially my mother when I was a kid, were just worried for the unknown of Tourette's. Like, it's not something you can put like a specific diagnosis on of like what sort of experience this person is going to have with this. And I think the unknown worried them a lot.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're a parent, you want your child's life to be, fruitful and smooth and free
Yeah.
of, things like heartbreaking things like bullying. I mean, no one wants to see that their child, be bullied, and it can. So I can definitely understand the concern of like, where is this going to go? Like it may be for the moment things might be okay, but we've seen these other portrayals of Tourette that are more, extreme, so to speak, in the media, and shout out to everybody who has Tourette, who's ever been portrayed in the media. I mean, it's such a big thing to pick up and trust, like an outside producer and what they want to show to the outside world. And this kind of echoes what we were talking about earlier. But those portrayals, I think, are also things that maybe kind of feed how parents regard their children when there's a new Tourette diagnosis that's come up, and where is this going to go? And, without the sort of like internalized institutional knowledge of what Tourette is, it's difficult to kind of break that apart. And, if I didn't have Tourette syndrome and I had a child who had it, I would be concerned about what that's going to look like for the life of my child. And completely understandable. But
and I've had plenty of great conversations with my parents about it. I'm much more open with worse tics now than I used to be, because I used to just see my parents' anxiety about it, and that would kind of have me clam up about my experiences sometimes.
Yeah.
Like my 7th and 8th grade years, I had sort of a tic, sort of an impulsive thing where for like pretty much 2 years straight, I could only chew on the left-hand side of my mouth.
Okay.
Not on the right side. Don't know why. Still don't understand it, but it wore down the teeth on the left side of my mouth. And it was something I was always really self-conscious about it, even though I don't think anyone else could notice.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell them about that until last year, because at first I was hiding it and then I just forgot that I had done it.
This is one of those things that, is important for, I think, the outside world. Anybody who doesn't have Tourette syndrome is listening to know about. Is I think a lot of people think of Tourette syndrome as like the very, very visible, very obvious, to the eye when you see it type thing. But there are so many annoying, aggravating, invisible tics like that. Because I've had similar mouth tics where I would like it's almost like chewing the inside of my cheek or something. Or
I had one where I would suck out all the saliva in my mouth, so my mouth would be dry all the time.
Yeah,
that was a really annoying one.
Gosh, I've had certain like mouth sound tics where I've had to like make a certain sound.
Oh,
but
yeah.
The act of doing that like fatigued me and kind of like wore me down, and like the muscles in my jaw, and like these are the things that are like just daily life. Imagine, it doesn't stop.
My jaw a bunch as a tic. And after a certain time, it starts not making the same like correct sound that I needed. So I'd have to like wait a minute and then start doing it again before it would make the right sound.
Is that pretty consistent with most of your tics where you have to kind of, perform it a right way? I say perform in quotes, but
definitely.
Yeah.
It usually has to like feel the right way or make the right sound for it to be okay.
It's like Tourette is, it's fascinating to me. I've lived with it my whole life, and I know pretty well my own experience with it, but it's still really, really fascinating for that purpose, for that specific reason alone, is that there are things like that where, the sort of OC part of it where you need to get it down a specific way before you can move on. And then 30 seconds later, you're doing it again, like you have to go through the same trial, the same mission of perfection. Loop. Yeah, it's a loop. And
I would tend to do tics in specific numbers too, like usually 4s and 8s and sometimes 2s and 16s and occasionally like one time. But usually I would like count it out as ticking for some tics.
Huh.
Like it was only with certain tics. Like I had a tic where I would like knock on some hardwood-ish surface surrounding me, and that I had to do specific times, like specific numbers.
Did it have to feel a certain way on your knuckles, or?
Yeah, I had to hit it in the same direction each time.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's one of these things where it's like those are the elements of Tourette syndrome that the outside world, it's really difficult to convey, how difficult and urgent it can be to get it right. You know, it's I
and
don't
then
even know how to explain
sometimes
that.
I would loop, like I would hit 3 of my knuckles correct, and then I'd have to kind of get the 4th one down, or I'd do it 3 times the right way and then 1 time the wrong way, and then I'd have to redo like the 4th time the right way and then do 3 more times the wrong way to even it out.
Yeah. Yeah, to even it out. That's a really good way of saying it. Like I would have one thing where I would ball up my fist, and the soft outer side of my fist, I would have to hit it on something like the door jamb or something like that, and it would feel a certain way. However that felt, it's almost like a game of horse. You know, if you're playing basketball, where I would have to take my other fist, the same soft side, opposite hand, do the same thing, and try to get it to feel the exact same way. And if I couldn't, I would have to repeat the process.
Yeah.
You know, stuff like that.
I've had some really serious punching ones with that. Usually it's punching like a hard surface like the floor or a wall or a table. Sometimes it's been punching my jaw, but it has to feel right.
I mean, have you had any injurious ticks, like where you've hurt yourself, or you have like a accumulation of pain, or?
I haven't had any ticks where I've like actually injured myself long term. I had a skipping tick for a while where I'm left-handed, and every tick that I've had that's like limb specific has always been on the left side of my body, because I don't know, mentally it just seems correct to me. So any punching ones, any sort of kicking, tapping ones with my foot have always been with my left hand side. I had one skipping tick where I would just skip all the time, but only once on my left leg. And one time I fell down a hill because I did that.
You fell down a hill?
Yeah, I scarred my foot from it.
Oh my God.
But other than that, I haven't injured myself long term.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. But so you mentioned earlier that, you know, you don't have, or you haven't necessarily, you know, like mastered the management part of it, but where do you find relief? Like is there anything that seems to kind of take you out of it?
Just sort of singing mindlessly to myself definitely helps. I do it a lot when I'm driving to sort of suppress tics while I'm driving. I'll just sing along to whatever music is on. I always have music on when I'm driving for that reason.
Yeah.
That helps me a lot. Doesn't have to be singing well, just has to be singing.
That's cool. That's cool. So the car is kind of like your relief, you know, kind of pod in a way.
Yeah.
It's the same with me.
Driving a little more draining than most people might, because I've never like ticked in a car really, but I have a lot of wants to tick. Like I want to like turn the steering wheel really hard one direction, and I really want to like press my foot fully down on the gas pedal a lot of times, which I've never done. I just really want to.
I feel the same way. And that is something where, you know, this is something I struggle to square, because tics are involuntary. If you got a tic coming on, you're going to have to do it. You can mask it. You can change it maybe in some way, but you're going to have to do it. When it comes to, you know, urges like that, I guess we'll call it. I have the same thing where I really want to jerk my steering wheel all the way to the left. Yeah. And I want to just, I'm driving, you know, 70 miles an hour in traffic. I want to slam on my brakes. I don't do it. I'm able to kind of override that urge. And I don't know what the Venn diagram is, like what an urge is and why, and what a tic is and why I can control one thing.
Area for me. Yeah, I don't know either. But a lot of mine, like I can suppress a really bad like punching tic or something when it's coming on if I haven't been suppressing a bunch beforehand. But sometimes, you know, you just have to. Like I know early COVID, I was working from home instead of at school, and I was just working off like a plastic table in my basement. And I had been suppressing a lot of tics because I had a lot of really bad punching ones, and that was worrying my parents. Yeah. And so me mentally was just like, I can't deal with talking about this right now. I'm going to suppress them around my family. So I'm doing them more mildly, which meant they were worse when I was alone. Oh, and yeah. I was having a meeting with my professor one day, and I just punched myself in the face right in the middle of our meeting, which caught him very off guard.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was
Wow.
a very bad term for tics with me just because I was trying to suppress them more than I ever would usually. I remember the worst tic that I've ever had was that term. And it was just a one-off. I've only done it one time. Luckily, I've never done it since.
Yeah.
But I was just sitting in my room one night and I just choked myself for like a minute. It wasn't like holding my throat or anything. I just like closed off my airways for like a minute straight and I just couldn't breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was really scary for me, but I never told my family until just a couple of days ago as a warning because I thought I might be talking about it on here because I didn't want to worry them in the moment.
Yeah, these we've talked about punching tics and things like that. These breathing tics are, at least for me, are the most uncomfortable. The hardest.
Those long term are very easily the worst tics that I've had personally.
Yeah. Even though it sounds like we're talking about something invisible, I think it is kind of visible or at least noticeable. You know, I've had them when I've been on phone conversations where I hold my breath and I can't talk. You know, I've talked about this in the podcast before when I was a news reporter and I would be on the phone with sources and all of a sudden, you know, I would just stop talking because I was holding my breath and I couldn't talk. I couldn't get it out and they would be, hello, you still there? And, you know, and I can't say anything and they can still hear all the background noise. So they know that the line didn't go dead because it's a loud newsroom. So they're just on the phone with somebody who isn't talking and they don't know what's going on. Like that's really, those are like the really awkward moments of
and I know
something like this.
Those tics aren't really audible for the most part, but like the breathing one, like you could hear me like breathing out really harshly and for like a long time. Yeah. And that one, sometimes I know my mom had to leave the room. No fault of her own. She has misophonia. And like some of my auditory tics are really hard for her to deal with because of that.
Has she listened to the Misophonia podcast? There is a podcast for it.
Oh, cool. I didn't know.
Yeah. Shout out. But yeah, that's really interesting. Have you noticed other kind of things that fall under the neurodiversity umbrella in your family?
Other than that, no, honestly, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, there are things in my family that I think make sense in context with Tourette syndrome, but I've never seen Tourette syndrome elsewhere in my family.
Yeah.
I don't have children or anything like that, you know. But depression, I think, exists in my family. I think that's kind of a thing that we've sort of passed down to one another.
In my family as well.
Do you have other, you know, co-occurring conditions? The iceberg, you know, has anxiety, generalized anxiety and sleep issues, depression.
Not ones that I've been diagnosed with, but definitely anxiety to some extent.
Yeah. That one seems to be fairly common. Not to you know, cheapen it or discount anybody's, you know, experience with it, but it seems like a lot of people with Tourette syndrome do deal with anxiety.
Definitely.
Yeah. How do you handle that? Does that does that affect your performance or?
My anxiety, if I'm more anxious some days, it definitely makes my tics worse, which makes me quite tired a lot of times.
Yeah.
That's how it tends to affect me, which makes it hard to do like a lot of schoolwork some days or be really present in social stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have to, I mean, the way it is with me is I do like social situations, but in a very limited way. I definitely have to, as people say, you know, recharge for a while after a social situation. I think because I feel like I'm conspicuous and people are wondering what's, you know, even though the people I'm hanging out with may not have me or Tourette or anything like that anywhere near their radar, I'm still worrying about, like, what are they wondering about me? Did they just notice that tic? You know, does that consume you in the same way?
I don't tend to mind people like wondering if I'm ticking. I've never gotten like outright bullied for having Tourette's, but I remember like in high school, people never asked about it, but I would get a ton of people just staring at me ticking from across the room in a classroom setting.
Sure.
I think that irked me a little bit, but I wasn't about to walk up to whoever they were and be like, I have Tourette's. Here, let me explain it to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I notice it more if I'm drained in social settings. I'll take a lot more, and then people tend to notice it. But other than that, yeah, I just need a lot of time to recharge.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. I mean, what else do you do? Is there anything else you do that you find to be therapeutic, or things you kind of do on your own when you do recharge? Or
I go for runs on my own at this point, especially when my breathing tic is less bad. And now that I can just run at my own pace, it's not as intrusive. I work at a dog daycare and boarding center, and working with dogs and being focused on dogs for a lot of time is honestly therapeutic for me. I take a lot less when I'm at work.
That's cool.
I only have a couple very specific tics that I do just related to the uniform at work.
The presence of animals is really powerful around me. I don't have children, but I do have 2 cats and a senior dog. I've had her since she was a puppy. She's 14 now. And
yeah,
when I'm in their presence, things do change. Like things are verifiably different in terms of how things feel. If I have, like a bad day, a sense of anxiety, something like that, depression, which is the battle of my life.
Yeah.
These guys are more helpful than they realize, for sure. Do you find that to be kind of true, that there's a therapeutic kind of power to being around animals like that?
100%. Yeah. And I don't think I noticed that as much because I've always been in a household that's had dogs. So I don't think I noticed until I left for my freshman year of college, when I wasn't around dogs a lot. Like how much it affected me sometimes. Because I would have days where I was more anxious and more ticky, and I didn't really have that as an outlet or a possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have pets in your home life?
Yeah, we have 2 dogs right now.
Nice. What are their names?
Disco and Petey.
Disco and Petey.
Mm-hmm. Both girls.
I like it. My dog Data, the one who's I just mentioned, she's 14. Then I have 2 little boy cats, Spot and Campbell, and they're oblivious to how important they are to me. They just happen to be,
Yep, happy to exist. Yeah, I remember I also had rats when I was younger. Those were the only personal pets that I've ever had.
Did they know their names? Did they have personalities and everything?
Yeah, they were sisters. I had them. How old was I? I think I was in 6th grade when I had them. But they were named Licorice and Butterscotch.
Oh, I love it.
And yeah, they were very sweet. I only had them for about a little over a year before they passed away, unfortunately. But it was a nice year. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I held a rat for the first time in my life in it was 2020, and they were so sweet. They were so quirky. Their personalities, they just kind of chilled, and they were a little bit hyperacting. I was a stranger; they didn't know, but yeah, it's so sweet and so calming. Fun.
Yeah,
they're
really calm pets, and they were just really active at night. So I would remember sitting in my room at night trying to go to bed while they were suddenly using their wheel at 9 p.m.
Do you have sleep issues?
Sometimes. Not generally, but I've had tics in the past that make it hard to fall asleep with.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
One of them where I would lie down, and then I'd have to have my hair and my pajamas sitting in very specific way to feel right. So I would just brush my head over my pillow 100+ times to try to get it to feel right.
I know exactly what you're talking. I have, at this point in my life, I have slightly longer hair, and I feel like I know exactly what you're talking about, where it has to feel texturally, temperature-wise, there's something where it has to feel a very specific way. Yeah.
And then I do it to the point where my hair was staticky, which then it wouldn't feel right because my hair is staticky.
Yeah, what do you do at that point?
I just turn over and sit on the other side.
Oh, man. Well, this is kind of crazy. We've been talking for, I'm looking at the time, it's 53 minutes now. And this has really zipped by. Is there anything I haven't asked about that you think is important? Anything that you want, Tourette syndrome, how you see it portrayed, how it plays in your life?
I think for me, at least, there was a period, like I had a 504 plan when I was in upper L and then into high school, my sophomore year of high school.
And so that's an individualized education plan for anybody who isn't familiar. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't explain. And for me, especially in high school, I had much closer relations to my teachers in my Montessori school, just with the format. But when I got to high school, I would have like separate testing and stuff. But on the first day of class, I always felt very othered by my teachers, just because like they would see my 504 plan before they would even meet me. So they would know that I had Tourette's and ADD, which is fine. But I didn't want it to be like the first thing that people saw about me.
Right.
Because then I would always get questions from my teachers. Like at the end of the first day, they would pull me aside and be like, okay, just tell me if you need anything, which I appreciated, but
yeah, it's a little just
I would have rather been able to start that conversation myself.
Yeah.
And I would always get like on standardized testing days, there would be someone else who would like come up and call me with their walkie-talkie out the front of the classroom.
Really?
So I would have to walk out of my class in front of all of my classmates, not knowing why I was going somewhere else.
How did you feel doing that in front of your classmates?
Didn't appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because I never had conversations with my classmates about having Tourette's or ADD unless it was close friends, because it just didn't seem pertinent to me. So suddenly I would just be going to a separate testing room for a couple hours and I'd have to sit there in complete silence, which did not help my tics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would have to sit there in complete silence with everyone else taking the test in the same room as me until everyone finished. So I'd usually also be missing my next class because of that. And it just wasn't helpful for me.
Well, that itself is a Tourette portrayal. You know, like that is something that your peers get to see and is not in your control. And you know, even though I guess we could say that the school district, the teacher, principal, central office, whoever had the best of intentions and thought they were maybe doing things the right way, but
I don't hold it against those people. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, it's that creates a wedge or an awkwardness when there's not the explanation that everybody necessarily needs to. You know, it's like being preloaded with information. People are not preloaded with information about Tourette syndrome and what it is. So when they see something like that happening, it almost like makes it a concern or something. It's there's at the very least like a negative kind of takeaway from like, oh,
Definitely.
Okay, something's happening here and she can't take the test with us. What's happening?
I would just have a lot of teachers underestimate me because I always did very well academically in high school, especially. But I would get teachers staring at me surprised, like when I brought up our first test as like the first person who brought it up. Like they just weren't expecting me to do well.
Yeah, that's kind of jarring too. You know, you can see the sense of shock on their face that you did something that they thought you couldn't do.
Yeah. And that's not something I experienced at all in college, which is great. And I would very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
But it's because that's not the first thing people know about me. Some of my teachers don't know that I have Tourette's until like the second class that I've had with them, just because it hasn't come up before.
What do you think is the hardest thing to communicate about what Tourette syndrome is or what the experience is like?
I think maybe just how draining it can be when it's not, especially when it's not very visual tics. Like I'll just have some days where I'm just sort of zombieing through my classes and like I'm present, but I'm trying to take in the work and information and also just ticking so much that I can't do much else.
Yeah.
So I think the sort of just, and it changes daily. It's not static at all. So even if I've had a conversation with someone like a month ago about one tic that was hard, I might not have that a couple of days later.
And so it's communicating, you know, how dynamic something like Tourette can be, and that can factor into, you know, how people track it, so to speak. You know, when they're trying to learn what Tourette is and how it behaves and all that, it's it's important for people to know that, yeah, it's not just like a set of tics that you can maybe get used to.
Yeah,
it's
I don't just swap out a new one when I want to.
Yeah. Or, like when you have a new one coming on, that's a new challenge. It's like you've had tics that maybe you know how to mask or something.
I'll get like anxiety surrounding when I've started doing one again. And I'm like, I really, really hope it doesn't stick around again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I don't really have any control. So.
Well, do you see Tourette syndrome as something that's created any positives in your life? Like any good takeaways?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really helped me be more open as a person. But just in having conversations with people, it's a great conversation starter, honestly. It's an interesting one. And it feels like a very personal aspect of yourself. So I think it opens other people up when you talk about it.
Yeah.
I think it's helped me a lot in that aspect because I'm always been very awkward, quiet in social situations. And sometimes I don't have a choice.
As we've talked about on past episodes, is, when you do get to open up about it and someone is willing to listen, they will be more open with you. There's something just so relatable about whether it's as simple as having a diagnosis or having something that's misunderstood, like, just having the benefit of getting to a place where someone does know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really, really valuable thing.
And it's really great to have conversations with people because you can not only possibly like explain better what Tourette's is in general for them, but also how it affects you personally.
Well, in telling your personal story, you're advocating for all kinds of people all over the world, men and women, any race, Tourette happens. And as we say, it's not as rare as people think it is. The experience of it is definitely rare and uncommon, but getting people to understand just like some of the basics or at least like, leave enough room when they see the real world experience of someone who has Tourette, you're advocating, with your real life story. It's really helping to kind of complete the mystery for people.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like, maybe they do know someone with Tourette's, but I know most of the people I've talked to didn't until they met me.
Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to Sophie for being our wonderful guest on this episode. So many relatable points. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you have any feedback on it, please feel encouraged to email tourettespodcast@gmail.com to speak your mind. Or, of course, join us over at the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, run by the amazing Sophia in the UK. Thanks also to the Tourette Association of America. They make this podcast possible. They're the largest advocacy group for Tourette and tic disorders, and there's so much they offer the community, from free videos on different topics to interactive and in-person programming. Of course, we mentioned the National Day of Advocacy coming up on March 8th. Yeah, it's in March, but that'll get here fast. You know it. I hope everybody had a great holiday period. It's good to be back. Even though we are on the home stretch of season 8, it's wild to me that we're filling out 8 full seasons of the podcast. There's a lot of episodes you can go back through and listen to at tourette.org or at tourettespodcast.com. Thanks for being here, and thanks also to the Geeks Rising Podcast Network for continuing to share Tourette's podcast with a larger listening audience. That means the world. Glad to be back, and we'll talk to you again soon. This is Ben.